Okay, we are live. This is First Draft Friday. Thank you for joining Authors AI for another edition. We are talking craft as always, and I'm really excited to have with us today JD Lasica and James Rosone. Is it Rosone or Rosen?
Oh, Rosone.
Okay, perfect. Who are masters in the thriller and military and sci-fi arena, and we're really going to be talking today about story beats. Story beats and using Marlowe and the AI technology in your rewrites. So I hope that was an accurate description of what we're going to be talking about. Yeah. I'm going to turn over the mic to these guys and let them take it away. But as always, please say hello in the comment section. Please ask any questions, and we'll be interacting with you guys as we go.
Thanks, Alessandra. James, very nice to see you again.
You too.
You were one of the you were there at the beginning of Authors AI, so I appreciate all your help along the way. For those who aren't familiar with your background, you've got a really interesting background in the military. You want to tell us about it a little bit?
Sure. So I spent about 10 years in the military, and then another 8 years working as a DoD contractor and also with the State Department. Most of my job, what a lot of people don't know about me, and I'm a very unassuming person, is I was actually an interrogator, a terrorist hunter. So my job was to sit down with no shit Al-Qaeda terrorists and actually question these guys day in, day out, and hunt these guys all over the world. So I have traveled to about 50 odd countries, been to a lot of off the beaten path places you've never heard of, seen a lot of weird stuff, but you know what? It all gives me some exceptionally great content to write about. And so I like to incorporate a lot of that stuff, into the different spy military type thriller type books.
One of your earliest books was Interview with a Terrorist, was that right?
Yeah, that was our earliest book. For me, I got into writing originally as PTSD therapy. That one of my counselors at the VA had said, why don't you try this out? So I started doing that. And part of the therapy was doing this CPT or cognitive therapy. Basically what it is, you sit there and you talk about the scenarios, you talk about the situations over and over, kind of desensitize yourself and decompress. So I did that. I started going through all my cases and I was like, man, why don't I just turn this into a book? And so that's exactly what we did. We turned it into a book called The Interview with the Terrorist and published it. And it was a flop, did terrible. Nobody really bought it. But that's because we didn't know anything about marketing. We didn't have very good covers. We didn't know about squat in this business. So we got better with it. And eventually the book was reviewed by by Fireborn Studios, who's decided to option it, and starting in another couple of weeks, they're actually moving forward finally with actually turning it into a screenplay so then it can be presented and pitched to Hulu, Amazon, Netflix, and we'll kind of see how that shakes out. And if it doesn't shake out with one of those, Jerry Angelo plans on moving forward and producing it himself with around $1.5 million budget. So we'll kind of see how that shakes out. But I'm excited to kind of see how that turns out. But it really led us to our entire writing career because we've gone on to write we published 18 other books since then and have another 4 more in the hopper right now.
Wow. Yeah, great background research for your books, but I wouldn't recommend that for everybody if they go to the Middle East. So you started out writing military thrillers. You've moved into military sci-fi a little bit. So tell us about that journey.
Sure. So as a marketer, one of the things you want to do is you want to saturate the space with your books, and you want to try and get as much of the audience as you can. You want to grab them all in. But when you've grabbed all of your audience, you have to find a new audience or a very similar audience. And so what I looked at is people who like to read current military affairs, military thrillers, also tend to like military sci-fi. And so part of what I'm trying to do and branch into that is to write a series near term 2090s and kind of rope that audience into my portfolio of military and spy thrillers that I already have, and then vice versa, my audience to this new series as well. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do right now. I'm not giving up the military thriller space. I've kind of designed it where I have 3 military thrillers that I'm known for, and then 3 sci-fi, and then I'll go back and forth between 3 and 3 and continue to build out the future brand that way.
And they seem to be closely related enough so you're not really hopping into a completely different genre, right? So
No, not really. I mean, I'm not writing space opera where we're just, I'm not writing The Expanse or anything like that. It's a lot more like Battlestar Galactica, so it's very relatable to a normal military thriller.
But tell us how, because I'm not all that familiar with the military thriller sci-fi genre. Can you tell us like the changes you had to make in your writing, your books, when you moved into that subgenre?
Well, I think that in all reality, every book needs to have the same kind of story beats, no matter what the genre is. You need to be able to have some kind of action or hook in the beginning to capture the reader, and then you got to have them pace throughout the book, so they're constantly changing the page, turning the pages and continuing to read it. So whether it's military sci-fi or a military thriller, I think some of those basics remain the same. It's about telling a really good story that captivates a reader and causes them to want to read through the chapter and then turn the page to read the next chapter. So there wasn't a lot of nuance that had to be changed in that respect. To be fair, I think that military sci-fi is a lot easier to write. It is not nearly as technical when it comes to the research. When you're writing military thrillers and you are talking about a Chinese aircraft dogfighting an American aircraft, you have to spend a lot of time reading up on both of those planes to really understand the terminology, how they're used, how they work. In sci-fi, when they're battling in space, you're making it all up on the fly. There are some physics involved, but you're not having to understand the technology of an F-16 or an F-22 compared to a Chinese aircraft or a Russian aircraft, because it's not, those things haven't been invented yet.
Yeah. So just last question on that, where did you start with your new series? Did you have to invent, a new, I assume you started by inventing a new main character from scratch, and then based it on what?
Well, we tend to write series. So when we write a series, it's 4 or 5 books. So I have to world build essentially every time I restart a new series. Yeah. So the unique thing and fun thing about sci-fi is I write the world once. Then I just have to live within it and continue to have stories inside of it. That makes it significantly easier than doing a military thriller where it's a new world every time you create a new series. So far, I've had to create 4 worlds in my military thriller genre, which is tough. The sci-fi, it's 1. So I chose to do near term, so 2090 is the estimate of when it kind of takes place. So technology and companies that are around now is still somewhat prevalent in that period. So it's relatable to my current audience. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time to talk about this AI war that took place in the 2040s that really led to the creation of the countries and regions that are governing our society in 2090. And so that'll be another way to kind of tie the 2 genres firmly together and really move the audience together into the new series.
Yeah. And does everything stay on Earth?
No, so we start out on Earth, but right now there's obviously expeditions they're planning and wanting to go out to Alpha Centauri once they establish the Mars base. So first is establishing lunar, because then once you're on lunar, you have the launch pad to go to Mars. So that's already taking place in our series. The colonies on Mars, we've got some explorations in the belts and different things like that. But now humanity develops faster than light travel for the first time. And they say, we're going to put together this expedition to go out to Alpha Centauri. Now, the Americans, of course, we send out probes everywhere, and America no longer exists in this world. It's the Republic, encompasses North and South America, as well as Great Britain, because, their whole Brexit thing, they decided to come with us instead of the greater European Union. So what they decided to do is they have probes all over the place, and they ended up discovering this brand new planet that's not that far away from Alpha Centauri as far as time difference, just in a different direction. And they decide to go off on their own. But when they go on their own, they end up discovering a very unique presence already on there, and that kicks off this whole new conflict. And that's where it's like, what the heck, if you just stuck to the plan and gone with us to Alpha Centauri, we never would have known about these people and known about this. You would have kicked up this whole hornet's nest, but now you drug the whole world into this thing, and now we have to put aside our animosities and come together to actually defend humanity and make sure we survive. So I think it's going to be kind of a fun little twist to it.
I think we found, talking to the folks who joined our startup, the most in the Authors Writing series. So for those who aren't familiar with the concept, what is the first book in the series? When is it coming out? What's your strategy about launching books 2 and 3?
Sure. So I have 2 new series essentially launching this year. The first one is Into the Stars, which is our Rise of the Republic sci-fi series. That one comes out on August 11th, and then we got a Discover Sci-Fi deal for the 15th. So I'll be glad that audience will also get to have an opportunity to buy it as well. And then the subsequent series, or the next series, is going to be Monroe Doctrine. That comes out November 30th. Now, one of the key strategies for these, though, is because Amazon opened up the aperture, so you can now do pre-orders in beyond 90 days.
Yeah.
So what we do is we have book 1 of the sci-fi series up. Book 2 is already up for pre-order, and book 3 will be up probably in a week or so once the cover designer is done with the cover, and then we'll be able to put that one up. And our goal with that series is to release these about 6 weeks apart, because those books have been done now for, I don't know, probably 3 months. They're just making their way through different layers of editing. So once they're all done, then that series will start getting released. And while that's happening, I'm already hard at work on book 2 now, the Monroe Doctrine, and continuing to push through that series and get that series out.
And for any new authors, especially who are watching this, what James just said is really important, I think, and when you're writing series, and especially if they're connected series, not spin-off, standalones, that it's really powerful to write everything before you release the first one, because you're gonna wish you could go back in time and change things in book 1 otherwise once you're halfway through book 3.
And I've already done that too, where I wrote through book 3 and went, whoa, we need to go back and make some major changes. And then Jasper Scott was kind enough to lend me several of his beta readers, and they read book 1, and they were hooked on it right away, which was a great sign. But they had some very good critiques of it too. So I was able to go in and make a lot of changes to it. But those changes required me to make substantial changes to book 2 and book 3 to get the consistency and make sure that it worked. So I highly encourage anyone to have at least 2, maybe 3 of the books done in your series before you even launch the first one. It allows you to have time to get them through proper editing. It also allows you to develop a really good pre-order strategy, because the pre-orders is a way to crush it. If you can nail those 3,000-4,000 pre-orders every time a book comes out, that's a $15,000 to $18,000 payday, depending upon your price scheme, how you price these things.
Yep. Let's talk about artificial intelligence for a moment. So you're at the cutting edge of this whole movement of using AI for long-form fiction. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you're using Marlowe, and explain to the audience how that works.
Sure. So I believe as an author, you need to use whatever tools are available to you to advance your career, to become more successful. That ranges from, like, say, joining SPF, Mark Dawson's group, and learning as much as you can from them. It also includes, mastery.com, and being able to learn from some of the legends in the field of writing, how they go about doing that. So that's mentoring and learning from people. But technology is also available too. And now we have this tool, Marlowe, that you can feed your manuscript into. And you can get a visual representation of where your manuscript is strong and where your manuscript is weak, and how it stacks up to historical bestsellers. If you want to create, there's 2 types of writers. There's hobbyists who just want to write and have a book out. And then there's career writers who want to make money, who want to pay off their student loans and support them for their families. Those folks really want to learn the craft. And Marlowe is a great tool to allow you to do that. You can visually see where your writer beats are, where it's strong, where it's weak, where it's slow, where it's too fast. And you can start to go in there and deconstruct the manuscript to pace it and figure out how you want this thing to really look before you actually publish it or pay to send it to an editor. And I think that's really important for authors to get involved in leveraging and using.
Yeah, one of the handouts that we're giving out as part of this First Draft Friday is a handout on story beats, story elements. Alessandra, you might would like put the URL in the chat, God, you're way ahead of me as usual. So tell us a little bit about, people define story beats in different ways. How are you using them?
So what I look for is, before Marlowe, what my wife and I would do, because we co-author everything together, we're a writing team like that. What we would do is we would look at chapter 1 through however many chapters it was. Then my wife would look at every scene inside of that chapter, and she'd write dialogue or action. And what we would do then is we would look and see how many dialogue sections there were before there was an action scene, or how many action scene there was before there was a dialogue. And when there was too much of one, we would go in there and we would manually move some of those things around to pace it out better. So we were unwittingly doing exactly what Marlowe is doing, just because we didn't know the technology was there. We didn't know this thing could actually be created, because I think even when we first talked with Matt back, probably was right around this time last year, they had just started testing this and started getting into this, and it's really evolved a lot over the last 9 months, with more testing. And so that's what we would do. We look to create the beats where every 9 to 13% throughout the book, it's either going high or low beat, almost like an EKG, where it's going up and down, and it doesn't need to all stay above the pace, the narrative arc there. So it doesn't need to all be positive. It can be negative. It can be largely negative. It really depends on the type of story that you're telling. And if this is book 1 of a series, then there's a lot of world building involved. And of course, you're gonna have a lot of negative towards the end, because it's that suspense that you're building that's gonna cause people to go, oh my God, I can't believe the book ended there. And then lo and behold, I have a snippet chapter and a pre-order link right there waiting for you. And that's how I crush it with the pre-orders, is because we've designed the end of every book to lead you to have to make that decision.
Let's encourage folks who are listening to ask some questions in the panel.
Yeah, ask away.
Yeah,
we can tell you how we've done it. I mean, we've gone through.
You mentioned Matt, so that's Dr. Matthew Jockers, the co-author of the Bestseller Code and co-founder of Authors A.I. He's actually going to be our next guest on First Draft Friday in 2 weeks from today.
Awesome.
Just come back, everybody. So tell us a little more about story beats. So you're sort of using these beats that are basically like action points, right? They could be reversals, they could be turns, different kinds of high points that are going to be made into a movie, right? So what are the kinds of, how do you find that useful?
Well, I find it useful because, all right, so when I was listening to Masterclass, I'll use another example here. When I was listening to David Baldacci speak, he says that the first couple of paragraphs in every chapter have to just grab the reader's attention, because it needs to get the reader to want to read further into the chapter. But he said equally important is the last several paragraphs in the chapter have to grab the reader by the throat and make them go, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. I have to turn the page. And when they turn to the page of the next chapter, they're going, oh my God, now I have to finish reading through the rest of it. So those are your story beats. Some authors are just natural at writing those and being able to make that happen. But even those who are, you still want to use a tool. I still recommend using a tool to help you refine that, to make sure they are where you want them to be. Because you can have the front half of your book being super fast-paced and lots of beats, but then the back half of your book is just dry as paint and boring. Mm-hmm. And you don't see it because you just went through all that action, or vice versa. The front part is so detail oriented with the world building that there's no action to cause someone to get to that halfway point, or that 1/3 of the point of the book where the pace actually picks up. And then what happens is, sure, you sell a ton of books, but your read through is absolutely atrocious on a series. Our worst selling series, one of our worst selling series has a read through of 63%. Our next one's at 74%. Then the current series that just finished out's at 92%. So really leveraged Marlowe's reports to engineer and create these books in a compelling manner that caused people to have to constantly turn the page and read the next scene.
And just to clarify for someone who's listening to us who may not know who Marlowe is or what we're talking about when we talk about that AI report. So Marlowe is like a developmental editor of sorts that is powered by artificial intelligence. You can submit your manuscript and you're going to get back a report on a ton of different things. But one of the things is beats. So when James ran through his manuscript, what it does is it kind of charts out chronologically your story and shows you where those major beats are. So you can see, and I was looking at the one for Girl on the Train the other day, that in the first half of the book, those beats were really spread out. And I know when I read that book, it was really slow for me to get started. So it's a great way. You can submit your manuscript, you can get a report, and you can kind of see, okay, have I been evenly spaced? Or like James said, is all my action at the beginning and then it kind of dies out. So there's that chart of Marlowe, but there's also one on pacing. And the pacing is interesting because I get a lot of customers reach out and they're like, there's no way my pacing is so slow in the beginning because I have all of this action happening. And I talked to Matt about that. And action and pacing are two different things in the way Marlowe views pacing. It's how absorbed is that reader? How quickly are they reading? And just because you might have your character doing a lot of action doesn't necessarily mean that that reader is really devouring that content and reading quickly through it. So those are two really interesting things that I think directly affect what you're talking about, James.
And part of it is also looking at what type of word choices are you using. Sometimes you're using the wrong type of word to convey the action scene you want to convey or to convey the speed at which you're trying to move the book through. And we don't always recognize that you use the word quickly too often, or you use another word too often. But the Marlowe report breaks all of that down for you and allows you to see that. So essentially, this is the kind of service you get when you pay $3,000 to $5,000 for a really good developmental editor. But the problem is a lot of folks can't always afford to do that. And this is an exceptional tool that new authors and even veteran authors can use. And I think as a veteran author, I will always use a tool like this because what it does is it helps me craft not just a really good book and manuscript, but when I turn that into my editor, I'm turning in a substantially better manuscript to her. So then she's able to help us turn that into an even better book. So it's kind of that saying of, garbage in, garbage out. If you hand your editor a really poorly written book, they're only going to be able to improve it so much. But if you hand them an outstanding manuscript already, they're only going to make it better for you.
I think when I was starting out, one of the struggles I was having as a new fiction author was to try to figure out how to space out different kind of action scenes versus more relaxed kind of scenes. The world building that you mentioned, the character building. What a lot of, I think, newcomers to the writing space haven't mastered yet is the idea that you actually have to give your readers some breathing room between some of these big scenes, right? So you can't have, like Marlowe would show you in a report, if your pacing is like all the way up here, steadily, and that's not good. You actually do want to have those valleys and peaks to give like a rhythm to your novel, right?
Correct. Otherwise, it's too fast or it's too slow. It's like what Alessandra was talking about. How you read that book and it was good, but it was just a tough slog to get through. Whereas if the book is so fast paced, it's just overwhelming. And then honestly, those books don't always end up with the best read through because it's just so fast, too much. There's not enough time to absorb what was just said. The people just end up putting it down because they need a break. And then suddenly they forget about it or another book comes along and takes its place. And that's what you don't want to have happen.
Or they start skimming. It's funny, like you'd think the more action you have, the less somebody would skim. But at some point, like I think it's just brain overload and they just need to break, a mental break.
Yeah, you run out of adrenaline at some point. But there was, because I was doing some research into this, there was an interesting book written by Dwight Swain, I think, in the 1960s. And he was talking about this concept of scene and sequel. So you have to like space out your big scenes and then give the readers a little bit of a relaxation. I don't like the word sequel because it has other connotations, but the concept is really applicable to a lot of what we're trying to achieve here. One of the things it's probably worth mentioning before we run out of time here is today is a big day for us. In a few hours, we're going to a freemium model on Authors A.I, so anybody can sort of see at least the basics of what we're talking about in this AI report by coming to authors.ai for free and registering. For that part of it, it's basically we're going to be calling it, James, we're going to be renaming the Author Lite report Marlowe Basic. And it's sort of like Grammarly on steroids.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of the same kinds of things as Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid, but a little bit better. And then beyond that is the Marlowe Pro reports, where you can actually see a lot of the pacing, analysis, the plot structure, the subject matter, the character traits, all that stuff. Do you use the character traits piece at all to sort of compare your main characters?
To be honest with you, I don't use the character traits as much. I think I just really kind of focus a lot more on the pacing, the story beats, and then words that I'm overusing.
Yeah.
If I'm using a word too much, I want to try to get better about that because I don't always catch that. And then it's really, for me, it's a lot more on the pacing and the story beats, because when you write in series, you live and die on your read through. If your series isn't doing well, you're going to be spinning your wheels. And frankly, my books, between editing for each book is, give or take around $35,000 to $4,000 a book. So I need to earn a certain ROI back on that to make that profitable. And, you want to focus on the things that are actually going to generate revenue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Quietly is one of the words I overuse. Apparently, my characters do everything quietly. So you had said quickly, so maybe your guys are really quick.
I use that one too. It's another one I use too. So
and so you actually run your drafts through, so like 3 or 4 or 5 different iterations of your book before you're finished?
Yep. So when I completely finish it, I run it through and I look at it and go, okay, this is it. Then what I look at is I go in and say, okay, now I need to go back in. I need to edit and make changes. And I'll go in and edit and make changes based on the first report. Once I've integrated in the changes that I think needed to be done from the first report, then I'll run it one more time. Then what I do is I take that refined report, as long as it looks the way I think it needs to look, then I take that report with the manuscript and I send that to our professional editor, and she looks at it and she can take what that report is saying and she can hone in and make this even better. So when it comes back to me, then we go through, we make the changes, I send it through one more time, and I compare what that third report looks like compared to the second report. So now it's in its final version. Before it gets published, I want to see how it looks and how it changed from the first 2 reports. And if it really is the way we think it needs to look before it gets published, then we're good to go and we publish it. If we still see something that's questionable, then we may go back in and we still may make another change before we publish. And by making sure we have 3 books out before the first one gets done and we set a long enough pre-order, we're able to give ourselves enough time to actually do those kinds of things. Because you want book 1 of any series to just knock it out of the park. Book 1 is super important when it comes through for buy-through, because we immediately have book 2 up for pre-order right there. And book 2 is just as important as book 1, because if they bought book 1 and loved it, you gotta crush it with book 2. Because if they buy book 1, they pre-order book 2, and they don't like it, they will tank you on reviews, and that will destroy your buy-through. I'm not saying books 3 onward aren't as important, but they are not nearly as important as the first 2.
And are yours cliffhanger endings or they're standalones?
Yep, absolutely cliffhanger endings. We make everything an absolute cliffhanger, so you're left going, holy cow, what the heck happened? I got to buy the next book. And the pre-order link is right there with a little snippet. And that way you have to go. You got to get it.
Have you ever run the entire 3 books through Marlowe, like combined them into one document and run them through? I was curious if there's what I mean? I'd be curious how it looks.
Honestly, I haven't yet, but that's not a bad idea. maybe I could do that. They're all in like different stages of editing. So
I
right now,
know it's not a simple thing to do.
it's all over. So it just take a little bit of work to delete all that stuff out, accept all changes, put it in one document. I probably should do that. Maybe I'll do that. I've just got, you know, it is.
When you have time, right? Yeah, that's the way.
Yeah, there are a lot of different kinds of authors who could use this report. So one is the aspiring author. People are just starting out. I think they can learn more than a few tricks from Marla. But even for veteran authors like yourself, it's interesting to see, you know, the kinds of things that you can actually, you know, go back and use it over and over again for.
It's all about building your brand and staying ahead of the curve. You know, you've got to leverage the technology and the tools that are available. So, you know, whether it's marketing on a new platform or it's a new writing tool like this, it behooves of you to stay abreast of the changes and try to figure out, is this the technology worth integrating into my writing? Personally, I think this is, because this is only going to improve your craft and make your books better. So it's one of those tools that's worth investing and being a part of and doing.
Alessandra, are there any questions yet?
We don't have any questions that y'all haven't already answered. So we're good on the questions. We are unfortunately out of time. If there's anything final you want to say, James, please, we'll give you a minute to do that. And I do want to announce the winners. So we have 5 winners of a book on craft, so which is the art of writing. And so congratulations to, I'm going to try to, Felicia, Patricia, Rebecca, Pascal, and Lizzie. So congratulations to you guys. We'll reach out to you via email. And if you want to enter future giveaways, be sure to follow us here in the group. Join it if you haven't already. And follow us at Authors.ai, our website. Anything else you wanted to add before we said goodbye, James?
I would just tell readers to take a chance and try it. You're not going to know what you're missing out until you've tried it once. If you're really serious about writing and wanting to make this a living and earn a lot of money, then I would encourage you to try this, because we all invest a lot of time and money and effort into creating a good book. This is a good tool to help you make sure that it is where you want it to be.
There's a wise parting word. So anybody who's interested in taking your writing to the next level or turning your hobby into a career, this is a good place to start. And yeah, James, you're willing to stick around, you know, after the chat and sort of interact with people. So if you have any other additional questions, you know, James has been more than kind in sharing his time and wisdom with fellow authors. So thank you for doing that, James.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you both for joining us. Thank you for everyone who joined and everyone who watches the replay. So we'll see you guys in the group.
Thanks, Ellen.